Amy Morgan, the feature writer for the Marriage Initiative, and I am just delighted today to introduce you to Laura Gallier. She's a Houston-based author, speaker, podcast host, and soon-to-be filmmaker who addresses the importance of viewing sexual intimacy through a biblical lens. Her Blessed in the Bedroom streaming course for married couples opens the door for meaningful conversations and topics that have once been taboo in Christian circles. Laura, thank you so much for being here.
Yes, thank you so much for having me and for this platform. So needed.
Oh, absolutely. You've had a personal journey that kind of led you to this place. You started with a platform for teens and parents, and kind of a purity platform to have. Do you want to start there and tell us how that led, and then we'll get to the blessed in the bedroom part.
Sure. Well, unfortunately, I did not have a biblical explanation of sexuality as a young girl, and issues with fatherlessness and just gleaning values from the media, my peers, early exposure to pornography. All these things shaped my sexuality, and I became sexually active at a very young age, experienced an unplanned pregnancy, just a whole big mess. And so I was a single mom myself in my early 20s when I finally realized that God's commandments are for my protection, and I needed to know his biblical standards, and I needed to follow them and trust him. And there was a lot of healing. I had a lot of shame, and ended up, drawing a line in the sand. I'm going to do things your way, God. Met an incredible man, Patrick, and we've been married for 23 years.
Yay.
Yes. So and we have multiple children, 3 kiddos, and we're flourishing in that way. Not that it's been easy every step of the way. That would not be honest. But all that to say that around 2008, I began speaking to parents and teens and wanting so badly to convey truths, not only to inspire young people, but really to equip parents to instill biblical sexuality in their kids. We're way more influential than we sometimes give ourselves credit for in our teenagers' lives. And so that's where it started, and eventually, and we could talk about how it led to Blessed in the Bedroom.
Yeah. No, I just think, thank you for sharing so transparently. I'm sure you're not the first person to tell me in these interviews that same type of history. It's very, very common in our culture and in America, but it's just wonderful how God has just brought you to the realization of his love for you, his redemption. I know that our marriage champions, this is nothing that they haven't heard. And it's definitely a story that many of them probably also live out. And that's why, like you, they're becoming champions for marriage in that way. So yeah, let's talk a little bit more about that, about what you had for the teens and the parents. And then we'll go on for our marriage champions, what you have for marriages.
So originally created a book series for parents and teens so that they could do this curriculum together, but found that the most efficient way to communicate was on video. So parents could just hit play. I have an unashamed 4-part video series, and it's meant to, again, just take the shame out of sexuality, give people hope and healing if they have fallen into some sex-related traps, or just really motivate those young people to protect their purity if they haven't gone down that path. And I found that was really healing for parents too. It was a healing journey for me, even teaching all that. So we have a video-based program for parents and teens.
I love that. Well, let's see so let's talk about now how that segued into Blessed in the Bedroom, because that's kind of the spot where our marriage champions are probably camping.
Yeah, well, in talking to adults, for one thing, I was surprised to learn that it wasn't just us that would have struggles, my husband and me, but there can be widespread struggles, obviously in the body of Christ and just in general, even non-believers, of course. And a lot of it is because we're carrying shame. We have resentments. The relational fallout of our marriages affects the intimacy in the bedroom. And so my husband and I learned that there were numerous couples that we were talking to that weren't even having sex at all, or it was rare, or there was just a lot of hurt because pornography had crept into the relationship. There was just so much hurt. And even hearing from people who said, hey, the church taught me that sex is bad. That was their purity approach. And now I'm supposed to be some tiger in the bedroom and it's not working for me. Yeah. And so there was just all this dysfunction. And my husband's the one who coined the phrase that the devil does everything he can to get us into bed before we're married, and then everything to keep us out once we are married, because it is such a beautiful expression of intimacy. It's so necessary for a relationship. So really just our own journey, things we learned the hard way, and things that were working really well, things that we had overcome, became our motivation for us to develop Blessed in the Bedroom. And without promoting it, I mean, doors have just opened for us to share at churches and various organizations.
Well, and you started with it, I think the first time you kind of offered it maybe like a streaming thing on Facebook or something. And let's talk about where it started and what it's become now.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, we did. We started with just an online course, and we're amazed how many couples signed up for that. It was really ideal because they could just log on from the privacy of their own home. Obviously, the topic is very personal, but we go out of our way to not make it awkward, just to be really appropriate and yet comfortable talking about these things. But so that was our first introduction. And then, to be honest, I'm like, how did this church, as a church not far from me, that heard about that? I couldn't even tell you how. But they started asking us to come in person, and then other churches started coming. We always include a time of Q&A. We get such great feedback that there's just not very many places you can go and have these safe discussions. Again, so it works in person. It also works in our streaming series where couples can discuss these things in the privacy of their own home.
And you've recently just revamped and relaunched, right? Let's give us a preview.
Yeah, well, we had a longer series where we were expounding more, and we found that really we could say things more succinctly and effectively. And the more we've done these and then had Q&As, the more we would realize this is what really needs to be talked about. So we've condensed it to a little over an hour format that touches on numerous things, and then we refer resources if we need to go deeper and talk about things more. So it's just more practical for couples to go through the content.
Well, let's talk about that content. What will they find, and some of the conversations maybe that it will spark?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's taking the taboo and shame out of it. Everything from shame from early sexual activity, abuse, or even shame that crept in if we as a couple together didn't follow God's plan. And so we address that and how to receive forgiveness and forgive ourselves. And then we move into how spiritual and emotional intimacy affects physical intimacy. And we always send the caveat that we're not trying to overly stereotype here, but there tend to be female approach to sexuality and a male approach. You can apply it however it works in your own marriage, but just talking about ways we wound each other and how to meet each other's needs and really just get the ball going, talking about these things, whether it's things that have been really hurtful or it's more upbeat and fun conversations. Every couple tends to be in a different place, but we're really trying to give practical tools that make sexuality unashamed, enjoyable, and no longer a source of tension in the marriage, but just very life-giving. At any age, newlyweds all the way to being older adults, it should be a part of our marriage that is blessed.
Well, and you talked about, you brought up like finding some people that really aren't even having physical relations. And I know one of the topics is, the ramifications of that, because that's not what God intended, right? I mean, maybe people think that that's kind of better, but that's not really what God intended, was it?
Right. And there's obviously situations where someone's ill or there's something like that. And that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about when we just lost sight of making it a priority. It can be because, for example, one of the things we talk about is maybe the woman feels like her emotional needs are not met. And so she resents his physical needs. And then when his physical needs aren't met, he resents her emotional needs. Perhaps she's villainizing his sexual appetite, that it's not spiritual, because again, the sex is bad approach. So a lot of it is understanding the differences between how men and women tend to think. And again, sometimes it's reversed. It's the man's emotional needs. We don't mean to overly stereotype there, but working through what is it that's causing us to under prioritize. Sometimes it's because we're not putting the kids to bed. We're going to bed exhausted, and later the kids are sleeping in our bed, if we're still in that season with small children. Or sometimes women just resent, especially tends to be women, at the end of a very hard day. She's very tired and it feels like she hasn't got much attention from him until the lights go out and suddenly he's paying attention to her. It can build resentment. So we want to help couples identify these resentments and even fears. My husband talks about the fear of being rejected, the fear of making an advance and me saying no, and how that rejection feels very injurious to a man's manhood. And then it felt really vulnerable to even talk about that to me. And so we've come a long way. And like I said, we like to share from lessons we learned the hard way, but then overcame, to help give other couples tools.
Yeah. I mean, I can remember when my boys, thankfully they're in their 20s now, but when you've had a toddler and a baby and you're nursing, I mean, sometimes that is the last thing in the world that even sounds appealing. But
Yes.
your husband has not been having a toddler and is not nursing, and it does sound appealing to him.
Right. And we talk very practically. There's a saying that women are microwaves and men are crock pots. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I said that backwards. Yeah, wouldn't that be different? Yeah, there is a saying that women are crock pots and men are microwaves. And we talk about the need for foreplay. And to be really honest, sometimes we just get too embarrassed to say, I really like that, or I haven't really liked that, and opening up those lines of communication, but encouraging that transition time from putting the kids to bed, the hectic work schedule, whatever that looks like for us personally, and taking it a little slower than some men are inclined to do, and being sensitive to the way a woman's body does not necessarily spring into action. Although we too have a physical response to arousal that's very important to the gratification process. And we talk about this, everything from kissing, believe it or not, causes us to release testosterone and prepares the body to enjoy the experience. So sometimes we're just rushing it, and it's as simple as slowing down. And then that makes it a lot of times more meaningful, which we want it to be meaningful.
Yes, yes. And even like you said, having those conversations, helping to negotiate a frequency. That's one of the things that the book talks about, that or the your
Mhm.
streaming course is just that satisfying to both. Just but even able to say that there is a frequency that you can get to, and it's okay to negotiate that.
It really is. And sometimes it is the woman who's wanting to be intimate more than her husband. And it can be about the physical gratification part, but sometimes it's the bonding and the emotions, and that's okay too. And so it's so, again, injurious when a need is not being met. And of course there's balance there. And we always say that someone who is operating in lust, maybe they have sexual addiction, they can be insatiable in their sexual appetite. And we're certainly not advocating that mindset that just says, hey, you owe it to your husband, be available every time, in an insensitive way that just objectifies really and turns us into what can feel like props. We're not saying that. Our heart matters, the kind of day we've had matters, but really it's about putting each other's needs first. And have we even talked about what tends to be our spouse's rhythm, and how can we honor that in one another?
Yes. Well, let's talk about that. About, you had talked a little bit about maybe, the church culture kind of having some messages and cultural lies that let's talk about those lies. I mean, there's probably lies on both sides of the spectrum that you bring up and address.
Yes, absolutely. I've been told, again, I wasn't raised in church, but I have been told that it is not uncommon for churches to tell women, like, you had better meet your husband's needs every single time, or he's going to cheat on you, or he's going to look at porn, and that would be your fault. And it's just this very shame based, almost duty based approach. And duty and arousal don't mix usually for most of us. And so renewing our mind that we are not subservient to our husbands. It really is a gift. It's something we want to give. And again, that opposite message that, men desiring sex does not make them unspiritual any more than a woman desiring sex. That's not fleshly or carnal. God invented sex, and some of us have the hardest time wrapping our mind around that, but it's blessed. There's absolutely no defilement of the marriage bed, providing we're keeping sinful, pornography and things like that out. But when it is with pure intent there, it is a blessed thing. And so, yes, it's very important, again, to get to the root of what would be these unspoken resentments and teachings. And if it did come from the church, let's talk about it, because that's not God's conversation and communication about sex. It's meant to be life-giving for both.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about pornography. You've brought that up, and that's definitely an area that that people struggle with, and that is in that you address, and you've helped people really get some healing from that. But let's talk about that. Why how does it intrude and
Hmm. We're inclined to think of pornography as a perversion based issue. It rarely is, if ever. It's a way of coping. It's a poor, and I would go as far as to say demonic way of coping. So it does cause the chemical dopamine to flood our brains, and especially in men, it can create a high. It can do the same for women. And so it depends on how much repeat exposure we have, and we're all wired differently. But what starts to happen is we have this dopamine flood and rush when we look at these pornographic images. Then when we walk away from that stimulus, not only do those levels go down, but in a short amount of time with repeat exposure, they can go below normal, that dopamine level. And now we feel depressed. So looking again becomes even more tempting. But now if we go back to that same imagery or video, it doesn't quite do it for us. It's like a drug. We need something more perverse. So it creates a cycle of depravity and takes us way further than we want to go. And so you can have people who are looking at pornography, again, not just because of a sexual urge, but because maybe they felt belittled by their boss that day. Maybe that's how they deal with rejection. It's truly a chemical high. And so it's a counterfeit way of coping with things in life. And when we identify what is triggering me to look at it, I've talked to many people who have been addicted, and they'll tell you, you don't feel better emotionally afterwards. You don't feel good, and yet you keep doing it. And that's the nature of sin and addiction. The good news is our brains can heal, but it's important to understand that so that when we, for example, cold turkey walk away from a very consistent pornographic habit, we will have symptoms of withdrawal as if we've been on a hardcore drug. A lot of people suffer that because those dopamine levels have become quite addicted. So that's just something important to understand. It's so hard. I have to say this as a woman, we're often told like it's not personal. If your husband does that, it's just lust based. It doesn't mean he doesn't love you, but it's very hard to tell the heart that it feels very personal. It can feel intensely like rejection. And so the key is honesty, a lot of accountability, confessing, getting to the root of the problem, which a lot of times dates way back to childhood. We got exposed early in life. And again, there's so much love and grace. And a lot of us think, I can't go to God about that. That's perverted. God is holy. I'm telling you, he wants to meet us in our addiction. Some people, I was the teenager who, and the devil would tell me this, I know it was satanic, I didn't recognize at the time, the girl who couldn't say no. I was that girl that just would give my body away to find love. And I believed that lie, and I came in agreement with that lie, and God healed me of that lie. So whatever the nature is of the addiction and the lie and the coping, what I really needed was love. And what we really need is healthy ways to deal with hard things instead of running to the chemical high of pornography.
oh, well, and thank you for being so transparent. I know our marriage champions, I know there's definitely many out there whose hearts are tugging along with yours. You really talk about that shame, and just in your telling your story and being so honest, that is just such a way to put light and destroy shame. How, I know you said shame can destroy intimacy. Do you want to talk a little bit more about how you guys address shame with your work?
Absolutely. I mean, there is no such thing as an insignificant shame-based thought. If it's shame-filled, it's destructive, and it can be everything from being ashamed of our bodies to
Hmm.
being ashamed of our sexuality, because again, we feel like it's somehow unholy that we even have these desires. Shame that we're having some struggles with arousal.
Hmm.
We attach shame in so many ways. And certainly if we or our partner has struggled with pornography, we'll want to just carry that shame. Some of us carry the shame of our youthful, sinful things. Again, it could be from with our spouse, resentments. Like, hey, I wanted to wait and you didn't respect that. And I still, 30 years later, I resent that. I talk to couples that say, we've never dealt with the shame that I got pregnant out of wedlock. I feel like it was his fault. I've been carrying this for 40 years, abortion, right? That can be ultimately the result of sexuality. So important to address shame with God, with loving godly people. If it's too much to handle and
Hmm.
process on our own, We know that Jesus bore our shame. He does not expect us to drown in shame. He wants to deliver us. And the opposite of shame is honor. God wants us to feel honored in our sexuality, honored in the marriage bed, honored as a man, honored as a woman. And so that journey can look different for each of us, but the key is not to just bury and ignore shame, because it will take its toll one way or another.
Mm, I love that. And you and I talked about restoring honor and having your marriage, having it be a safeguard for your marriage, and that the legacy it leaves for your family and your children. I know you had a big event fairly recently that kind of highlights that. Do you want to share about that?
Yes, so my daughter recently got married, and at the wedding, she and her fiance had chosen to base their relationship on Christ and to reserve sexual intimacy for marriage. Such a proud moment when we see our kids do better, right, than we did. And I have to say, the presence of God at their wedding was just palpable. I did not expect that. I knew it'd be beautiful. She's beautiful. He's handsome. We had beautiful flowers, a beautiful venue. I knew that, but the way they included Christ in their ceremony, and just they did not bring shame to the altar. And they were honest. It wasn't easy. They didn't say, oh, we're so spiritual, this was a walk in the park. That is not what they said. It was challenging, but they did not want to introduce. That's what they would say. And my daughter would talk to me about this. I don't want to introduce shame, Mom, into the relationship. And one of the things we instilled in our kids is that walking out purity is so important, because we sometimes think, oh, I love you so much, I can't resist you. Well, how will we resist that attractive coworker or people later? You know, we have to walk in purity, not just until marriage, but throughout our lives. It was just so cool to watch that foundation of love and that relational intimacy they have with Christ. It translated on their wedding day, and it's just totally unforgettable, the experience.
I love that. Well, and it doesn't surprise me that you did such a beautiful job of instilling great values and self-worth into your daughter, because you also are the lead developer of an I Am Worthy mental, emotional wellness, and character building program for students that you started working with in some Houston-based schools. You want to tell us a little bit about that? I think our marriage champions would think that would find it very interesting.
Yes, well, it really goes hand in hand with marriage and marital health, our own sense of self-worth. And so in my own journey of healing from brokenness and trauma and some mental, emotional hardships that I went through, it resulted in this passion to pass that along to students. And I collaborated with some really brilliant minds, some doctors, counselors, just really neat people. And we came up with 21 universal affirmations of worth. And we turned that into a video-based curriculum for public schools. So it is not faith-based. It lends itself well to incorporating scripture, but it is not faith-based because it's intended for public schools. And there's curriculum samples at worthyprogram.com. It is intended for parents to do in the home, not just in schools. We completed the middle school module, but we're raising funds to develop the elementary module and also high school eventually. But I'm telling you, as an adult, getting to work on that, it was so life-giving. And obviously, the better sense we have about ourselves, we're going to be able to love better. And of course, I base that on the love of Christ and encourage all to do that. But yeah, stand by that curriculum. It's been really amazing.
Well, and the proof is in the pudding. Obviously, it's something that you benefited with and your family. And I know it sounded really interesting when we talked about it. You also, as you were talking a little bit about spiritual warfare and the power of God and the power and also some of the lies that the devil was telling you, you also are an author of the Delusion series, which is kind of describe the series that you mentioned. You said it was like, oh, you had a great analogy for it. So give us the backstory there.
Well, sure. As I was teaching biblical sexuality to parents and teenagers, I realized how even in the church, we just don't necessarily believe in the demonic realm, or we think it's something relegated to third world countries, or only incarcerated murderers have demonic activity, and we don't have a sober understanding of how sin, rebellion, even unforgiveness, hurt. The enemy will prey on our hurt just viciously. And if we don't believe and understand the schemes of the enemy, we will turn God's commandments into just, rules or behavior modification. I need to be good, premarital abstinence, just be a good girl, be a good boy. No, it really is about protecting our sexuality from unclean, evil spirits. And so I thought I was going to write more nonfiction about that. And the Lord inspired me. No, let's do this through the package of entertainment. So I could reach people that would never set foot in a church or listen to a sermon or anything like that. And so the premise is that there's a young man who's a senior in high school. He's very cynical. He has a hard home life. He couldn't care less about God, knows nothing about the Bible. And his high school has a suicide epidemic. And through his own near-death experience, he begins to see how his classmates are being preyed upon by the demonic. He also sees angelic forces. Again, he has no vernacular for this. He calls the demons creepers and the angels watchmen because he doesn't know what to call them. And so it continues through a 3-book series, his life journey of learning about these things. He asks God really hard questions and poses really hard questions that we should all be asking. And so, again, we're working on the feature film for that. There'll be more books in the series. It's right there available on Amazon, the Delusion series.
Well, I remember now how you described it. You said it was Frank Peretti meets Stranger Things.
Yes, that is true.
And being a fan of both of those, I was very intrigued and looking forward to digging into those books myself. Because sometimes we learn a lot, right, from reading the young adult stuff.
That's right. Adults are enjoying it. I just got a message today through Instagram from a parent I don't know that was just saying how it opened the door to such important conversations with her kids and then also her friends. So you definitely don't have to be a young adult to enjoy it. And I'm told they're really hard to put down, that the storyline's really captivating. So that's a win for me as an author. And I love that it's entertaining and enlightening.
Oh, yeah. Well, you said you are just getting ready to start on the feature film. You want to give us a little preview in the next few minutes?
Yeah, well, I have come on as a producer at a local film studio here in Houston called For the One Studio. And we are in the middle of raising quite literally millions of dollars because you don't do this cheaply. You could, but then the production value would be cheap. And what the Lord's put on our heart is to do it with excellence. So we are hoping to be in production, I should say pre-production, by this fall, just getting ready, getting those shoot locations, casting, and then by next spring or summer might be better just because we need a school. We're hoping to be in production as those funds come in and the pieces come together.
Oh, so we're looking at maybe a 2025 release date?
Yes. I mean, that would be amazing by the end, definitely by the fall of 2025, if not early 2026. It is a long game with the movie industry.
Oh, yeah. I would think, especially since it's your debut.
Exactly. And we do see it as a film franchise. We want to do a series of movies. And so we want to do this first one right. So we earn the right to keep making excellent films.
Absolutely. Laura, is there anything that I have forgotten to ask you about? Anything else you think you'd really like our marriage champions to know about you and your work?
Just that I'm easy to get a hold of through lauragallier.com. That's LauraGallier. You can download a free first chapter of The Delusion, see the resources that we have, and I check my own messages and emails. So if you use that contact form, I'm easy to get a hold of. I'm also being intentional as of lately to post more on social media and put out valuable content that's edifying.
Oh, I love that. And you've had a podcast series, and those are still available as well. And I personally found those very helpful. So
Yes. The Fearless and Free podcast, those are still available. I've temporarily stepped down as a co-host just to make this full-time focus with all we're doing for the Delusion series. But those episodes are there. And we have 57 episodes, so there's plenty to listen to.
oh yeah, I know I personally benefited. So I can't read to get to my first chapter. So anyway, well, Laura, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. I really appreciate you so much.
Oh, it was great. And as always, Marriage Champions, if you'd like to find out more about Laura Gallier and her resources, you can look us up at marriageinitiative.org.